Hello, everyone. Welcome to another guest interview within Mindful Journey. So excited that you're here with us, and I'm so delighted to bring you our guest today, Diana Winston. For those of you who may be on and seen that little aside, Diana and I, this is our first time meeting. She graciously accepted my invite to join us here within Mindful Journey. For those of you who are practitioners of meditation, immersed in mindfulness in some capacity, you may be familiar with her name as she has been coined by the LA Times as one of the nation's leading mindfulness teachers. I forget the verbiage, admittedly, pulling this from your website, of course, Diana. She currently leads she's a director of UCLA Mindful, which is a mindfulness education initiative in conjunction with UCLA Health out in Los Angeles, of course. She's been featured in a variety of publications and has many other accolades that lend her credibility. But without diving into too much of the granular specifics of that, what I've seen personally from Diana from afar and just some of the other podcasts she's been featured in is a warmth and humility in her tone and an ability to articulate what can sometimes be perceived as complex ideologies like mindfulness into simple and easy to understand methodologies and practices that we can all implement in our life to hopefully get incrementally better and be more present more often. So, with that being said, Diana, thank you for being here and looking forward to our time spent together.
Great. It's great to be here.
For those who only have maybe a surface level understanding of mindfulness or no understanding or haven't been practitioners of meditative practices, can you briefly overview what is mindfulness?
Yeah, sure. So mindfulness is, I define it as paying attention to our present moment experiences with openness, curiosity, and a willingness to be with that experience. So it's really about bringing our attention into the present moment, not lost in the past or the future. If you were to check into your mind at any point in the day, you'd probably notice you're thinking about something that happened, replaying it. Why did I do that? Why did I say that? Or thinking about the future, planning, obsessing, worrying, catastrophizing. And mindfulness is this invitation back into the present moment to be with what we are experiencing in this moment instead of lost in all our worries and concerns and ruminations that take us out of the present moment. So that's the kind of nutshell of what mindfulness is. And I'll just add one more thing. It's cultivated through a meditation practice, and it's also a quality of attention you can have at any time. So you learn to do it through what we recommend is like a daily practice, but then you also can have it bring it into your life.
Mhm. Does bringing your attention back to now, kind of inward as you described it, require formal meditation? Because sometimes I hear people say, well, my mind's always wandering when I meditate. I don't like it. I don't know how. I'm not good at it, which is, I'd love to get your insight. You've probably got so many things you can share with us that we're not attaching to an outcome with it. But simply put, do we have to be in what society may coin as a formal meditation wherein we're utilizing an app to be mindful, to be present?
Okay, there were a lot of things in what you said. So mindfulness, we can be mindful in this moment. So if I were just to say to you, take a moment and feel your feet on the ground or your hands and just turn your attention to your hands, and you might notice that your feet or hands are warm and they're tingling or heavy or light. That's mindfulness. So you just were able to do that right the second. Hold on, my dog is trying to get out
Sure,
of the.
sure.
And sadly, I guarantee in about 2 more minutes he'll want to come back in. But in any case, so mindfulness, it's the way in which we can pay attention with that present time attention. Now, it is one of the, or probably the best way to cultivate it is through a meditation practice. So because if I just said to you, be mindful, you might get it, you might not. But if you practice it, like any skill, you'll get better at it. It'll be easier to do, and you'll have a sense of how to use it, particularly when you need it, like when you're about to
Mhm.
yell at your kid, or when you are, get a frustrating email, or you're upset about something. So the meditation practice which I recommend. I have people do it. I mean, you said apps, you can do it. Like we have an app, CLA Mindful app that has guided meditations. But the main thing is you're just learning, you're training your attention, right? You're just paying attention usually to our breath or to we can listen to sounds, and then our attention wanders off and we bring it back. And our attention wanders off again and we bring it back. And the thing is that most people, there's this stereotype about meditation, like, okay, I'm supposed to be meditating and my mind's going to go blank. And the fact is, that's not what happens for people. What happens is you just have the same busy mind you had the minute before you started, but you work with it and you teach yourself how to come back into the present moment. And like with any skill, it gets easier and you're able to do it more and more over time.
Beautifully said. When those thoughts come up, if we are actually utilizing a guided meditation to bring ourselves back to now, on purpose, um, what do you do when the thoughts arise? When they're coming up, if you have something, I love that you used a work email that you might get frustrated by. That's something that can probably resonate with most folks. If when you're either lying down or sitting down, and going through a guided meditation, uh, what do you do when the thoughts come up to ensure that you don't lock into and attach to them?
Um, well, it's kind of a simple, hold on, the dog is back. I'm so
Sure,
sorry.
sure.
Hold on, I'm right back. Okay. We had a good adventure doing
Yeah.
going outside and then walking back in. Um, so when what we do with the thoughts, first of all, it's not a problem. Like this is people's one of the biggest obstacles that people face when they're trying to meditate, or it is that they get caught by their thoughts and then they think I'm doing this wrong. I'm thinking instead of being present. But what I have you do, for instance, is if just in a basic, so first we're talking in meditation, then we can talk about in daily life.
Mhm.
But if you're, let's say you're noticing your breathing, and then you maybe notice one breath or two breaths, and then suddenly you're thinking about who knows what you're having for lunch and what you had for lunch yesterday and what you want to have for lunch tomorrow, right? Your mind, that's what our minds do. There'll be a moment when you notice that you're lost in thought, and that's a moment of mindfulness. And so I often have people just acknowledge that by saying thinking very softly in their mind, or let's say
Mm.
wandering, and then redirect attention right back to their main focus. So, and then you do that over and over. And that is the training that allows the mindfulness to get stronger, to get cultivated.
I like that you said thinking. I wrote that down here. They just drawing kind of like an awareness to it. So you're not maybe judging the thought, but just aware that you're actually thinking the thought. Beautifully shared. What got you into practicing meditation and interested in mindfulness, now leading UCLA Mindful? I think I read that you've been in this space since 1993. What was the trigger, if any, that drew your interest to it?
It was after college. I was traveling around India. I was sort of not sure what I was doing with my life. I ended up in Dharamsala, where the Dalai Lama has government in exile there. And everybody was doing Buddhist meditation, and I was sort of skeptical, not sure what I thought about it. But there was a little bit of peer pressure because so many people were doing it. And it just started to seem interesting to me. And I ended up doing a meditation retreat. And there were things on that retreat that really, really spoke to me. And do you want me to go in a little more depth about
Please,
what?
yes, I would love to.
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Um, so what the teaching, remember, so first I'm kind of skeptical. And one of the things about me to know is that I was very driven person. I was kind of type A and I needed to do well. I was very much a perfectionist. And so there was a teaching that's called that sometimes referred to as like the eight worldly winds, or the eight truths about reality, that there are opposites that come together throughout life, so that where there's pleasure, there's also pain; where there's gain, there's loss; where there's fame, there's disrepute; where there is praise, there's blame. These are considered these eight worldly winds. And what's happening is we're constantly going back and forth, chasing the good one, running away, sorry, from the bad one. And we just create this mind that's like in constant reaction to life. And I heard this and I was just like, oh my God, that explains my life up until this point. Of course, I'm young,
Yeah.
but it was I realized that I'd been seeking praise so significantly and running away from blame and this like drive to perfectionism. And so I was like, there's something very important here. And then the teacher said, well, there is a way out of this. And that is creating a mind of equanimity. Equanimity is not a very common word, but it's a word that means a mind of balance, of even-mindedness that could be centered no matter what the ups and downs are in life are. And I
Mhm.
heard this and I was like, oh, I want that. And she said, and here's how you get that mind. It's called meditation. And then she, started teaching that. So that was the start of my journey. And then I just dove in and I spent many, many years living in monasteries and retreat centers around the world,
Mhm.
practicing mindfulness meditation because I loved it so much. So that was the beginning of it all.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I'm glad you brought up your perfectionism because I also think that's something that can resonate with most folks. I think a lot of times we are so afraid to act because we want things to be so perfect that our full potential is never really realized. And when you brought that up, it reminded me, I think I read in your bio that you're a Brown University graduate, which, obviously our society looks at Ivy League as very high pressure cooker environment, very much filled with type A personalities and perfectionists of sorts. My question to you is, because I think this could be your answer could be hugely beneficial to all of our listeners, to people everywhere, quite frankly, is how did you break through to people who maybe looked at you? Because coming out of Brown, everyone probably had this expectation that Diana's going to go do amazing things. She's going to now work in this big corporate America job and make all sorts of money. And I'm betting, and maybe I'm wrong because I don't know you fully, but when you told your family and close friends that you were going to dive into this world of mindfulness, there was maybe some skepticism. And I think that skepticism can hold a lot of people back. So I know this is a long-winded question, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you recall having done to not attach to what others thought about your pursuit. Was it difficult? And if so, what did you do?
It's interesting. I like the question. There's a lot here. So I graduated in the 1980s, and it was a very sort of a time in the country where pretty much everyone I knew was leaving college and going to either law school, medical school, or to some sort of corporate job, right? That was it. And they thought that I was like nuts. What are you doing? And then, so, okay, well, she'll just go for a year and she'll come back and then she'll go to graduate school or she'll do something, right? And my parents were like, when are you going to graduate school? Um, and and so I ended up really staying true to myself and following my path and following what I was like deeply interested in, despite the fact that I was the only one of my friends doing stuff like this. And my parents, I mean, my parents actually were pretty supportive of me. They were really they loved what I was doing, but they didn't quite get it, but they thought they saw how meaningful it was to me. So I didn't have that enormous pressure, except for the one when you go into graduate school, then which then became, when are you having babies? Those are the parent things. But I will tell you this, that fast forward 20 or 30 years later, the same friends who thought I was like a nut job, what are you doing going and living in monasteries and meditating, are now saying to me, will you teach me to meditate, Diana? Because there's such a change in the field, right? In 20, 30 years that people are really interested in it now. So that's kind of gratifying. But what it spoke to me about is that I really stayed attuned to what was meaningful to me and I followed it and I didn't let myself be detracted. And I didn't, sometimes I had to do things like I spent like 8 months waitressing so that I could go on another long meditation retreat. It
Mhm.
wasn't like it just all got handed to me or something. I had to like figure out how to, pay for these meditation retreats that I wanted to do and if I'm going to travel in Asia. And so it was like a single-minded focus because I loved it so much. It
Mm.
was so tremendously meaningful and helpful to me. And it was where when you start something like this when you're young, it's like your whole identity gets formed around what you're doing. And it got formed around, oh, I'm going to cultivate wisdom and compassion and understanding and self-understanding and a sense of how to be and like to in the world. So anyway, I don't know if I'm quite getting at your question, but trying to.
No, yeah, absolutely. It's the one thing that we all have in common, right? We I think we're living in a time, and part of my belief is social media has perpetuated some of this constant comparison. But as a result of that, everyone is doing things, from my view, not everyone, that's bold, right? But a lot of folks are doing things based out of pressure and not passion, based out of desire to fulfill what their parents want and not what they want. So what your example, yeah, it was beautifully answered. Your example was perfect of, your parents in particular. When are you having babies? When are you going to graduate school? So it sounded to me like you were able to, in spite of maybe some of those external pressures, just go inward and have a confidence in pursuing what felt right to you. There was a question that came in from one of the guests. I think it's timely for this part of what we're talking about. It says, how can one incorporate mindful moments during their day if they've never done it before or don't have time for it in their busy day or schedule? I'm trusting you've probably heard a variation of this question many times.
Yeah, of
What
course.
would your what? Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so you kind of hit on this before, but there's what we call formal practice and there's informal practice. Formal practice is when you sit down and you meditate. And as I recommended, an app can be really helpful because you don't have to sit there in silence by yourself and just, not sure exactly what to do. So like our UCLA Mindful app, or there's lots of great apps out there to build your meditation practice. And I start people only with just 5 minutes a day because we all have time for 5 minutes. So that's a partial answer to the question that the person is asking. Like, you can have time for 5 minutes. Everybody,
Yes.
I hope, should be able to.
Yeah.
Um, and once you get the hang of it, then you start to have the capacity to be mindful throughout the day in different ways. So I was kind of hinting at that before. Like, let's say you get that really frustrating email. You might immediately respond back, you jerk, why'd you send that to me? Or you might take a pause, feel your feet on the ground, take a breath or two, notice what you're feeling, and then maybe make a different decision, right? So little moments like that can make a huge difference. And I'll give a little acronym that I like to use, but just to say that you can intercept the sort of reactivity of your mind. Our reactivity is like when we're acting out of our habitual patterns without consciousness. We got
Mhm.
that email, we just write, you're a jerk. We're driving, someone cuts us off, we cut them back off. I mean, that kind of reactivity in life. So with mindfulness, we can employ it in a moment to have a little bit of more responsiveness to life, not be
Mm.
so caught. And not only when it's hard, but also when you want to savor life. Like, a lot of times we have beautiful experiences and we just skip them right by. There's a beautiful sunset and you go, oh yeah, that's nice, and you walk past it,
Yeah.
or you're eating a meal and you're so busy talking about other stuff and thinking about it that you don't even taste a bite of this delicious meal. So we can bring mindfulness to any moment to enhance the moment and also to work with when things get difficult. So the short little tool that I like to teach is called STOP, and it stands for stop, take a breath, observe, and proceed. And what that is if you're just wanting a moment of mindfulness, or you're upset or anxious or angry or whatever, you want some mindfulness, you can remember to stop. So it's stop. And then you take a breath, and you can do that with your eyes. Why don't everybody just do it with me right this moment? So we stop, we take a breath, eyes open or closed. And then we observe something that's happening. And so just kind of sense into yourself what's happening. Oh, my stomach is clenched, feel a little sleepy, I'm over caffeinated, I hear some
Mm.
sound. Just like just notice what you're experiencing. You can take another breath. And then we pee, proceed, and we're done. And so we can even do it shorter than that. We can stop, take a breath, observe. Oh, my heart is racing. Okay, breathe. proceed. It could take like 6, 7, 8 seconds, but it's a great way to bring mindfulness into your life because being mindful is actually not that hard. We all did it for a minute ago, a while back. It's remembering to be mindful. That's the hard thing.
Yeah.
So that's why we use that tool.
Yes, I wrote that down, so forgive me if I wasn't looking at you that time. I've not heard the acronym before, and I really, really like it. I think any little tool or nugget that we can use to remind us, like you mentioned, we all have the capacity to be mindful, to be where our feet are, to be present, but it's that when and the cutting off, somebody cutting you off, just having that trigger to say, oh, okay, they weren't doing it to me. Let me not react, but thoughtfully respond and let me stop. So that's super important. Is there anything else from a maybe larger perspective that you've relied on aside from a guided meditations that has been helpful for you? Take, formal, again, meditation out of it, just from a performance standpoint, showing up in your work environment as the best version of you. Do you any journaling or other activities that have allowed you to show up as the best version of yourself?
I do lots of different things. I mean, I do journal some and I've been in therapy and obviously meditation is a huge part of my life. For me, I would say what keeps me the best at my best is my connection to mindfulness and presence. So when I say presence, it's just that being here, showing up for life. So that when I have a daughter now. I did eventually have babies, but I have a 15-year-old, and it's like it goes by so fast. And it's just, I bring to her as much as I can, and I don't always do it. I'm not perfect, but my presence, I'm not sitting there on the phone like, oh yeah, that's cool, what you're up to. I'm there with her. I'm present with my friends. I'm present with myself. I slow down. I don't fill my days with busyness so that I miss the whole day. Being in nature is really, really key to me. I live near the beach, so I take a walk on the beach at least, once or twice a week. There are a lot of things that I do to support the quality of presence so that I'm not overwhelmed by life. And especially these days where things are just so insanely overwhelming. It's very, very important that we find places to take care of ourselves.
Definitely. The overwhelming piece is so true, and I wanted to ask you this. I knew coming into today, I wanted to get your feedback and expertise because I'm guilty of this, where I can become reliant on my phone to almost escape the external, right? And one of the guests that we had a while back, she'd mentioned this was profound to me. She'd mentioned that, the reason we're all so miserable today is because we're avoiding being miserable, and she wasn't bringing a darkness to it, but it's almost like we're so afraid to sit with our thoughts, so we escape them by technology. What are you seeing in your world, in your experiences, expertise, research that you've done that's maybe contributing to this mindlessness, and what do you recommend to people, particularly as it relates to the phone, that they can do to not be so attached to it and in dire need of it?
Yeah, it's the big question, right? I've heard someone recently refer to it as their weapons of mass distraction, right? Um, I mean, everybody is like, they're glued to their phones and I mean, there's, of course, all sorts of wonderful things within the phone. And then there's ways that we just check out of life entirely. And I don't think like a certain amount of that is fine, but when it starts to become our way of being in the world, that's a problem because then we are missing our lives the way that I was sharing earlier. And so I've also seen it impact people's concentration. I mean, the research shows that it impacts people's ability to concentrate. It impacts the people's social abilities, right? People don't want to like connect. I mean, I watch my daughter like I remember talking on the phone all the time when I was a teen, and she's like they send each other videos or they text each other all day long, and I'm like, wait, you don't even talk to them? But So there's the way, the concentration, the social issues that are impacted. And then the thing that as a mindfulness teacher, I get really concerned about is people's inability to be bored, right? Boredom is like this amazing thing. It feels uncomfortable, but out of it grows so much. But there's no downtime. The second you're bored, you pull out your phone and you start, I don't know, playing Wordle or something. I mean,
Mhm.
it's so all of that being said, I think that people who want to have more presence and connection to themselves and others could benefit from phone Sabbaths and right, like turning them off at certain times, and they're not at the dinner table and they're not at past a certain hour of the day. And screen time is, I use screen time for my daughter, but adults can use screen time too. I did actually, there was an app that I was like starting to play a lot, this little game, and I'm a meditation teacher. And so I've had to put screen time limits on
Yeah.
myself. And after a while I got bored of it. But so those kinds of things, because otherwise we just lose touch with that sense of our humanity. We become just
Mm.
this partial phone beings.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I'm so happy you mentioned that you had to set screen times for yourself, and thank you for being so human and vulnerable. That's one thing from my vantage point, sometimes, mindfulness meditation teachers or, these self-help gurus today or whomever it may be kind of projects and presents like, no, I've got it all together. I don't face any difficulties, and we're all very, very human. So it's neat to hear you just mention that you relied on something to help you, right, to navigate. So you're utilizing the very practices you're teaching us. What about from a parenting perspective? I'm sure there will be some parents who listen to this. I can't relate to that. I also want to have kids newly engaged. So assume hopefully we'll be able to bring that to life. But I have zero parenting expertise. So I am curious, though, because I hear from friends of mine who are parents how difficult it is, one, um, to show up for them the best way possible, and secondarily, to know how to help them disconnect from technology. And I'm seeing this at all ages, from 6 to 8 to 10 to 13 to 15. I know that's probably like a two-part question, but I guess one is, what's your advice to parents who are maybe having a difficult time connecting with their kids? And then two, what can they do to help their kids not end up living in a time where they're unable to interact with people because they're so used to doing this?
Yeah, great question. Okay, so connecting with your kid means you have this, like, we all have that capacity. Like, we all can, when we were children, little kids are amazing, right? They're like so connected. Like, they'll look you in the eyes and they're just like they're right there, or they look at life with mindfulness. They look at every little bug that's on the sidewalk and they want to just be so present, right? So we were all like that. We all had the capacity, but then, life intervened in various ways and we got busy and lost touch with it. So, doing things in our life that help us return to our own capacity for presence and connection and wonder and joy and all of that is absolutely crucial for every single one of us. And in particular for parents, because we then model that for our children, right? If you're on your phone all the time, that's what your kid is going to see. If you are really present with them as you play, as you feed, as all those things, then they're going to sense your presence and they're going to have that capacity. And that's going to be the underlying thing that they will know and embody and live with because you embody it. So that's the
Hmm.
first piece. The second piece I would just say, and this is just, I mean, take it or leave it, but keep them off having their own phones as long as possible and keep them off tablets and stuff as long as possible. They don't need it when they're little. It's a great babysitting device, but there's many other things that you can do. And I kept my daughter off a phone till I think what it was at 13. There's this thing called wait until the eighth grade. You take a pledge not to give it to them till eighth grade, which we
Oh,
did.
wow.
And she was like the last one in her class and complained a lot, and I'm really glad I did. I feel like I mean, she's a very much a teenager now. It's a couple years later. there was nothing she got left out of at all. She's completely like savvy, but we do time we're like, okay, phone free time right now for the next couple hours. Phone not in your room at night. That's really, really important. But just
Hmm.
keeping them away if you can.
Yes, yes. What is the research saying to your knowledge? And I'm trusting you have a little bit of insight on this about the phone at night. I've seen different things about, the 30 minutes before going to sleep, how the blue light can impact your REM sleep. Are you familiar with any of that? And if so, would you mind sharing with us, not just for children, but how phones right before sleep can impact us as adults?
Well, I mean, I think I've seen the same research studies that you've seen because I don't, I mean, that's not my expertise exactly,
Okay.
but I have seen that the blue light can impact us. But what I will say, just from personal experience, is I put my phone in another room if this is possible for people. I like it stays in our kitchen. We have a little charging area. And when I go to bed, there is no phone in the room because what I've seen is if I do that, if I use it as an alarm or whatever, I have a regular, like old school little alarm, if I don't, I'll just be like, well, let me just check the news. And then I go down
Mm,
the news rabbit hole and then I'm like awake and I feel panicky and I don't want to sleep. Or I wake up in the middle of the night. Well, I'll just see a little bit of this, right? So keep it away from you. And I think
great
that
advice.
helps with sleep. And it seems like, I mean, it seems like that's sort of the consensus of scientists around night and keeping it away from meals so that our
Mhm.
meals are not, that when we're with a family or with a partner, that we're just us presence. One of the things we teach at UCLA is called relational mindfulness. And relational mindfulness is learning. First, we learn how to, internally be mindful, and then we learn how to bring it externally. Like, how do you actually practice mindfulness when you're with another human being? And some of the principles around that is you give your full attention. You just like you would give your attention to your breathing when you're doing a meditation practice, you give your full attention to the other person. It's much more interesting actually to be mindful with another person than with yourself because like our breath can be kind of boring, but another person typically is not. So
Mhm.
we give our full attention. If your attention wanders away, which it might, you bring it back. Just like the
Mhm.
meditation, if you remember how I described that. And then we can stay connected to our bodies because our bodies are in the present moment. Our minds
Mhm.
can be anywhere, but your body is right here. So if I said to you as you're talking to me, just, like we did earlier, notice your feet on the ground, your butt on the chair or something. Take a breath. We're right here. You can still listen to me, and it helps you be more embodied, more present. So that's the
Mhm.
mindful listening component. And then the mindful speaking is also staying embodied, feeling your body, noticing your breath from time to time. But the main thing with mindful speaking is being real, speaking from a place of a little more authenticity and depth,
Mhm.
because oftentimes we open our mouth and just blah, blah, blah comes out of it. But speaking from like, hey, this is how I'm feeling. This is the, and you can even bring mindfulness into your speech. Like, wow,
Mhm.
I notice as I talk about this, it's making me happy, right? I'm
Yeah.
mindfully expressing what I'm noticing. So anyway, that's an
Yes.
aside, but that's what I
That's that's wonderful. And the phone also comes to mind there when you're talking about relational mindfulness. I really like that term. And this isn't to pat me on the back. I feel like I tend to do a good job of this because I know it's an irritant for me when I'm mindful that the person I'm meeting with is distracted by their phone. Of course, I never say anything unless it's like a loved one and I got comfort with them. I'm like, hey, do you want to talk to me or do you going to be on your phone?
have.
But if you go into a business meeting and somebody has their phone on the table, it's even if they're not actively engaging with it, it's sending the message that you're really not the most important person there is. And I understand we all have got families and such, and there might be emergencies, but the phone on the table is just such a distracting thing, in my opinion, that sends a message to somebody else. And then if they pick it up, I'm cutting myself off there, not mindfully speaking, but if they pick it up and are now reading a message, it's taking away from that interaction, that connection. So you're bringing up so many points, Diana. Gosh, I'm loving this conversation. There's so many ways that I could continue and questions that come to mind, but I'd like to take it because I try to do this with every guest, and I think I'd shared with you on the front end. to bring a little bit more vulnerability to your level of comfort. One of the things that I strive to do through these conversations is to let the listeners know that we're also human, right? That we have failed experiences, potential relationship challenges, difficulties, financial challenges, whatever that may be. But because, again, bringing up social media, I think, in my opinion, we're in this constant comparison, looking elsewhere and say, well, Diana might be a better meditation teacher than me, or she has a better house than me, or a better family than me, and a better kids than me, and the old adage of comparison is the thief of joy. I think there's an abundance of truth in that. So what we're wanting to do, I'm teeing this up for you for the question, is wanting to hear from people, because some may look to you and be like, wow, Diana's got it all together. She's leading UCLA Mindful, UCLA Health, prestigious, Ivy League graduate, etc. But I'm sure you've faced difficulties too. So the question is very simply, what's the most challenging thing you've gone through in your life? And then what are the coping mechanisms or the things that you relied on to help you get through them?
Okay, and how much time do I have?
As much as you'd like. Yes, I know we're scheduled
Okay.
till 10 Pacific time, but we can go longer, of course.
Because I can tell a story and I can be as very detailed or a little detailed. Uh, so, I mean, first of all, of course, I've gone through challenges in my life. I went through a divorce that was really painful, and out the other side, things are very good, but that was extremely, hard, and many challenges, and loss and deaths of family members, and so just want everyone to know I'm like everybody else. And but the story I want to tell you is part of my spiritual journey, and it was actually one of the hardest experiences that I ever had. And that was when I was in my like early 30s, late 20s. I had been meditating at that point for about 10 years, and I had a teacher who was a Burmese man who had a monastery in Burma. It's called Myanmar now, but and he invited me to come meditate in his monastery. And it was so I went and practiced. And Myanmar is very it's had a repressive regime for like 60, 70, 80 years or whatever it's been. And so the country is very underdeveloped. And I went and I lived in a monastery, and I wanted to become a Buddhist nun. So I was ordaining, which meant like shaving my head and wearing nun's robes and things like you can't eat after 12 noon, and
Mm.
you you had to just meditate all day long. So I went to live, and it was in the jungle. I was totally isolated. It was hot. There were snakes and spiders and scorpions, like really big ones, like this
Oh,
big. There were spiders like this big. I'm not kidding.
oh my
Um,
goodness.
yeah, it was a very hard time. And then like I was getting sick a lot on the food, and it was very, very rustic and simple living situation. And so that was hard enough, and being isolated away from my family, but I was also in silence meditating. So I was doing about 15 hours of meditation a day, sitting and walking and sitting and walking. And you couldn't eat after 12 noon. As I said, you got two meals, one at 5 in the morning and one at like 11 or something, and that was it. And lonely, did I mention that? And
Mm.
but I was very, very driven. And this is where I go back to what I said in the beginning, where I had this kind of like type A personality where I like had to succeed. Yeah, like you mentioned the Ivy League, I got to get great grades and succeed. And so my goal for doing this was I wanted to reach enlightenment, which in that system of Buddhist practice is essentially, it's like having a mind that no longer has greed and hatred and confusion. Like you have a mind, like this pure mind. But the way you do it is you practice really, really, really hard. And then at some
Mhm.
point, this thing happens, which they tell you that you're okay, now you're enlightened. And I just kept meditating harder and harder. I know that sounds ridiculous, but doing things to like try to reach this goal because I wanted my A in meditation. And And I did things like I'm just going to sleep sitting up, so I don't, so maybe if
Wow.
I'll just st sleep sitting up all night. I'm going to only go down to like 4 hours of sleep at night because that'll give me more time to meditate. I'm going to be mindful every single second. My teacher would say things like, did you wake up on the in breath or the out breath? Like you had to be so hardcore mindful. So I'm telling people to be mindful a few times a day. They wanted you to be mindful every single second. And I pushed and pushed and pushed myself. And as you can probably imagine, it wasn't the best idea. And I finally sort of fell apart. And this was probably one of the hardest moments of my life because if we think about when we pursue our dream, this was my dream, right? I would go back and I would meditate in the style that had been done for thousands of years within this Buddhist monastery. And I would achieve my goal and I would go home and I would be like this perfect person or something. And I failed. I didn't even, at that point, I was sort of like, what even is enlightenment? I don't know. But it wasn't happening for me. And, so I'm like, I quit. And I went to see my teacher and I said, I'm leaving. I want to go to the beach of Thailand and just relax. And he said, fine, leave. But if you do, your mind will always follow you, basically.
Mm,
And so there I was in all this grief and failure and sense of inadequacy and I knew that even if I left the monastery, that wasn't going anywhere. So I made a decision that night to stay, but instead of practicing meditation with a kind of like aggressive need to succeed, I decided to just practice compassion for myself. And I spent
mm,
weeks and weeks and weeks and months sending compassion and kindness and relaxing and learning to just be present with the joy of a cup of tea instead of this goal of some future success. And as I did that, it started to heal some of the drivenness, and the need to what became very obvious to me was I was trying to reach this enlightened state so I didn't have to be me. Like me as
wow.
Diana wasn't good enough. If I could just get that, then everyone would love me. Then I would be a good person. And I started to instead realize that I was already okay. Like the goodness was already within me. There wasn't anywhere to go or get. And it became a beautiful time. And it just like one of the most gorgeous, amazing periods of my life where I lived in states of compassion and care for myself. And so that is probably the pivotal moment in my life's journey.
Mm.
I don't know, 25 years ago now, and the hardest thing I went through that I feel so grateful that I had the skills and the understanding to get myself through it because I could have left when things were bad. I could have left and then I would have been stuck with all that, grief and self-hatred. So
Thank you for your vulnerability and for openly sharing that. It's a truly powerful story, and deeply grateful that you shared it with us today. Diana, so much to unpack from that. One question that comes to mind immediately for me is what gave you the courage to stay? Can you point to something internally? Was it the man's words? What gave you that courage to say, a coping mechanism, if you will? Because what I'd love our listeners to be able to take away is if they're going through something in their life that is difficult to them, be it a divorce or financial challenge, sometimes giving up feels like our only option. What was the courage or trigger that you can point to that said, I'm going to see this thing through?
I appreciate the question, and I feel like it was a combination of things. I think it was um, so trying to really think back in that time. I think it was the recognition that like something else was possible
Mm,
and I just needed to stick with it and stay and but do it in a different way.
Yeah.
this old way is not working, but there might be another way. And that other way was coming from a totally different perspective, right? This perspective that there was nothing wrong with me. So all of the other ways of working, of trying to of striving were based in self-hatred. And so when I got an inkling that another way was possible, that is what helped me to stay and to stay on track. And then there were things that influenced it. I found some books, some materials that were really helpful. And I mean, so it was a combination of things. And then
Yes.
once I started to have moments where I was more loving towards myself, that like built up my ability to keep going in that direction.
Yes. That's what
Mhm.
I was pull as you're sharing it. That's what I was thinking, if in my own life, how can I kind of reinvent myself of sorts and attach to hope that this self-talk that I've been saying about myself isn't true, that I can be this kind, compassionate person to self. I don't have to be a perfectionist. And that is some deep introspection that you did, because I think so many of us, and I'm guilty as charged, and probably um, still at this point in my life of, that perfectionism of sorts where, we're so attached to what others are going to think, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you for sharing that with all of us. It's so freeing to know that we can just be us.
Yeah.
We can just be us. So beautiful. For
Mhm.
for a person today, and we can close with this if it's good for you. Um, One of the things that we're also trying to do in Mindful Journey is really the overall program, beyond these guest interviews. This is just a small function of the actual community, is wanting to give people hope, wanting to give them skills that they can learn, kind of that holistic approach, not just mental health well-being, but this the realization that sometimes if we're not dealing with something clinically diagnosable, just, we can still face hardships, and a potential weekly challenge or a kind word or something can get us over, to the next day and get through a difficulty. With that in mind, if there's somebody listening today and they're feeling like they're in a hopeless state beyond some of what you shared here today, what's your encouraging word or message to them, to ensure that they can get to that next moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful question. And I also saw that someone asked a question about guilt. So maybe I could weave the two of them
Oh,
together.
yes, 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 that'd be great.
So the question was, what's your advice to single moms who are about taking time away from themselves, right? Or so
Yes, sorry,
um,
I just hit the button that said answer
oh, that's
live.
okay. But I think I got the gist of it. Let me do that and then sort of round it out with your other question. First of all, it's so important as a parent that you do take time for yourself. I know everybody's like the culture and your internalized sense of guilt makes you feel like you can't do that and you're a single mom and how do you take care of your kid and also take care of yourself, but you have got to. I'm just going to say this. I'm going to say this to you, the person who asked, you have to take care of yourself. Otherwise you will burn out and get resentful and it's no fun. So even if it's just little incremental things like take a walk, do something for yourself that's just totally joyful, starting a meditation practice, whatever it is, I just want to encourage you to do that. One of my favorite quotes from the feminist theorist Bell Hooks is, self-love is the foundation of our loving practice. Without it, our other efforts to love fail. So we can't, the cliched thing, put on your own mask before you put on your kids in the airplane, right? Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is the question of, can you ask it again so I can just check into myself a little bit more?
Certainly, yes. Basically, somebody who's feeling hopeless, they're hearing you today, they're inspired, Diana, they're going to implement some of this, but they're still like, I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills. I don't know how I'm going to get through this. They're just feeling hopeless. And what's the encouraging word to them to ensure they can get to the next moment?
Well, I guess it's sort of a basic sense of like, you can do this. Like you do have the capacity within you, and you don't have to do it alone. We think we get really, just like I was in the monastery, and I'm like, I'm going to do it, I'm going to solve this. But it's really when we bring in community and support and we acknowledge that we might be vulnerable and need help. It's very, very important to ask for help. And to know that we all have tremendous reserves of strength and capacity and goodness inside ourselves. We get really confused and we think that we are our anxiety, we are our grief, we are our shame, we are our anger. But that's not who we are. We're
Yes.
something so much more than that. We are not our anger. We are not our grief. We are not our anxiety. We are bigger, stronger, have more capacity. And through introspection and getting support and meditation, if you like that, or whatever is your doorway into yourself, you will build your capacity more and more, which we need now tremendously. We've got to have capacity in this moment because the world is gone a little wild, haywire. So, so build that capacity and you can meet whatever life brings.
Amazing, amazing last words. You can meet whatever life brings, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. Diana, you have been wonderful. I'm so deeply appreciative for your time, for your
Mhm.
expertise, for your vulnerability, and for what it is that you shared here today. I hope that our paths will cross in person. I'm based far away from you in Florida, but I love California and love Los Angeles. So hopefully we'll be able to keep our connection alive. And well, I'll follow up with you offline and give you this recording and such. But again, so grateful for you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Great to talk to
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah.
Likewise. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you for those who listened in. And again, Diana, thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.
Take care. Bye.